Becoming tells the story of Michelle Obama N.E. Robinson. Born to loving parents in a working-class Chicago neighborhood, she grew into a strong, independent woman who just happened to meet and fall in love with a man named Barack Obama. This is the life story of a woman who didn't expect to become the first African American First Lady, yet found a way to continue exercising her own unique voice under the most unusual and trying of circumstances. One of Michelle Obama's earliest memories is the sound of clinking piano keys. To her ears, this was the sound of ambition. In the room beneath her bedroom, Michelle's great-aunt Robbie taught piano lessons. Michelle was certain that she wanted to learn the piano. This was near the end of the 60s in Chicago's South Shore neighborhood. It was a time of political turmoil and social unrest, but Michelle was too young to have understood much about what was going on outside her home. Her close-knit family included her brother, Craig, who was older by 2 years, her father, who worked at a water filtration plant and loved the Chicago Cubs baseball team, and her mother, who was a whiz with a sewing needle and active in community fundraising. One of the things that really brought their family together was music. At family gatherings, a cocktail of voices and horns filled the house. Ella Fitzgerald, John Coltrane, Miles Davis. It was her grandfather, known to everyone as Southside, who bought Michelle her first record, Stevie Wonder's Talking Book. But learning how to play music was a different story. What's more, Robbie was stiff and strict. Her posture was impeccable. Her reading glasses always hung around her neck, threatening scrutiny. She scolded her students often. Nevertheless, Michelle was eager to win her approval. If you've taken piano lessons, you know that one of the first steps is learning to find the middle C. Middle C functions like a musical landmark. Knowing where it is enables you to position your hands correctly on the keys. But when you are 4 years old and sitting in front of 88 keys, finding middle C is no easy task. Fortunately, on Robbie's piano, this key was chipped, making it easy to spot. The first big recital. Once a year, Robbie would present her students to an audience at Roosevelt University's Music Hall. Michelle put her hair in pigtails and wore a cute dress. She was ready to shine. But then, when she took her seat at the piano, she froze. There was no chipped key. Where was the middle C? That's when Robbie came to the rescue. She calmly walked onto the stage, reached over her shoulder like a guardian angel and pointed. Michelle could now start her recital. Chicago's racial transition. One of the remarkable features of Michelle's upbringing is her area was 96% white in 1950 and then 96% black by 1981. She grew up in the middle of this transition. So, she was surrounded by a mixture of black and white families, but more and more families decided to move away to the suburbs. This movement meant less funding, and the area was deemed a ghetto. Michelle and her family still regarded this area as their home. Michelle's mother was a highly influential woman in the local community. She was also highly influential in Michelle's education as she grew up. In the 2nd grade, Michelle told her mother that the teachers could not get the class under control, and Michelle was missing opportunities to learn. Michelle's mother also made sure the school tested her abilities. Michelle was moved up to a class with high-performing children. This decision is potentially the most crucial in how her life turned out. Her top performances in school led her to attend Whitney M. Young High School in Chicago, a magnet school. The teachers were progressive, and her fellow students were all high-performing children. It took her 2 buses and 90 minutes to get to school each day. Some of her fellow students lived in high-rise apartments right by the school and would wear designer purses. Despite doubting whether she fitted in, she put her head down and received excellent grades. During her time at school, Michelle involved herself in the school's societies. She was the elected class treasurer. Michelle was also in the National Honor Society, and she was on track to finish in the top 10% of her class. Despite this, her college counselor told her that she might not be Princeton material. Beforehand, she had been excited by the prospect of Princeton. Her brother, Craig, had attended Princeton, and she thought she might join him there. Upon arriving at Princeton, Michelle recalls the experience of being one of the few non-white people. This was uncomfortable. For example, less than 9% of students in her freshman class were black. Despite this, she enjoyed her time at Princeton. She found a welcoming community and a fantastic mentor. While at Princeton, Michelle's mentor was one of the Third World Center leaders. Her name was Cherny Braswa, an energetic New Yorker who was a strong black woman and a working mom. During her time at Princeton, Michelle became both Cherny's assistant and her protege. Cherny even encouraged Michelle to start running an after-school program for the children of black faculty and staff members. Her future was influenced by Cherny, who inspired her to become a working mom in the future. After majoring in sociology, Michelle started to consider Harvard Law School. Getting into Harvard Law School and meeting Barack Obama, Michelle did decide to pursue Harvard Law School and subsequently took her LSAT test. She enjoyed her time at Harvard Law School, but it is the period after this that shaped her life. After graduating from Harvard in 1988, Michelle moved back to Chicago to work for a law firm called Sidley Austin. Here she met a young law student named Barack Obama. He immediately exuded confidence and self-reliance. Unlike Michelle, he had taken a couple of years between Columbia and Harvard Law School to decide what he wanted to be. Michelle had heard of Barack before having even met him. He made a fantastic impression on everybody he talked to. Also, the professors at Harvard had been calling him the most gifted student they had ever seen. At the time, Michelle remained skeptical about this man, Barack. Her role at Sidley Austin was to meet promising law students and encourage them to join the firm when they graduated. When meeting Barack, she realized she didn't have much advice to give him. Having taken time out, Barack was more experienced and mature than students Michelle usually advised. She recalls people at the firm asking Barack for advice on matters. Her friends were hugely impressed when they met him. They encouraged her to overlook Barack's smoking and go on a date with him. After their first kiss, any doubts about her future husband vanished. Michelle and Barack's relationship developed rapidly. Michelle's brother was highly complimentary of Barack, especially as Barack was a decent basketball player. Michelle's brother was a college basketball player and subsequently a basketball coach. His affirmation helped the relationship continue to flourish. Barack became the first black editor for the Harvard Law Review, which meant they had to live apart for a while. Barack was then able to move to Chicago to live with Michelle. Throughout their early years in Chicago, Barack was offered many jobs, but he remained considerate, instead choosing community workshops over high-paid law firms. During this time, Michelle was thinking about moving away from her work at Sidley Austin. She didn't want to work on behalf of corporations anymore. She wanted to help people. In 1991, Michelle met Valerie Jarrett, somebody who helped her transition her career. Valerie would ultimately become a lifelong friend of Michelle. Valerie had also been an unsatisfied lawyer and wanted to help people. She had been working for the mayor's office. Valerie used this opportunity to help Michelle get a job as assistant to the then current mayor, Richard Daley, Jr. In October 1992, Michelle and Barack were married. The following year, Michelle worked on an initiative called Public Allies and used this experience to obtain a role working at City Hall. Then, a few years later, the job of executive director for a non-profit organization emerged. This organization connected promising young people with mentors who worked in the public sector. This was a fitting job for Michelle, as she felt civic-minded mentors had heavily influenced her. Michelle wasn't initially keen on Barack's political pursuits. She understood that Barack could win people over. She recalls him speaking in a church basement to a small audience of women concerned about their community. Michelle wasn't the only one to notice his political potential, though. The Chicago magazine noted Barack's fantastic work on the Project Vote campaign and suggested he should run for office. Not fussed by this at the time, Barack instead wanted to write a book entitled Dreams from My Father. This book was published in 1995 to decent reviews but insignificant sales. It was based on Barack's unusual life story of being brought up between Indonesia and Hawaii. In 1995, Barack was teaching a class on racism and law at the University of Chicago. This year he was also approached about starting a career in politics. A new seat was about to open up in Michelle and Barack's local area. Michelle was not excited by this prospect. She believed Barack could have more of an impact working for a non-profit than in the state senate. Barack believed he could have a positive impact on politics. Michelle's opinion of politics didn't exactly improve as time went on. Barack was absent a lot. Simply finding the time to enjoy a family dinner together was a rare treat. In fact, Barack's absence became such an issue that they eventually entered couples counseling. So when the idea of running for the US Senate was brought up, Michelle wasn't thrilled. So Michelle did give her approval, but she made him promise that if he lost, he would give up politics and find another way to make a difference in the world. As fate would have it, this time his Republican opponent dropped out of the race. Everything changed during the 2008 presidential campaign. The husband she once knew became a blur, a man in constant motion who needed to be everywhere at once. And then there were the threats, which meant that Barack received a Secret Service security detail earlier than any other candidate in history. A first lady. There were some positive aspects to life in the White House. One immediate benefit was that Barack no longer had to make long daily commutes. The Oval Office was literally downstairs from where they lived. But now Michelle faced a new and very unique challenge: being the First Lady. Unfortunately, the job doesn't come with a playbook. Nevertheless, Michelle was highly aware that the world was going to be watching. And since Michelle was not only First Lady but first African American First Lady, the world was sure to be watching extra closely and just waiting for a misstep. When you are the First Lady of the United States, going out on a date with your husband isn't so easy. It felt like ages since they'd been on a date, and the idea of dinner and a Broadway play seemed too amazing to pass up. The presidential motorcade brought New York traffic to a grinding halt, and people at both the restaurant and the theater had to go through security checks. It wasn't just embarrassing. It opened the door to a parade of negative press. Michelle Obama's life has been one of striving to excel as a student, a professional, a mom, and a first lady. Along the way, she learned to better understand who she was as an individual and what she wanted to do with her life, rather than striving to fulfill some predetermined expectation. Michelle became her own independent woman, a working mom who could help her kids as well as the people in her community. Looking back, she can see that her time in the White House yielded quite a few successes, along with the Let's Move program, which brought healthier school lunches to 45 million kids and signed up 11 million kids to associated after-school programs. There was also the Joining Forces initiative, which helped 1.5 million veterans and their spouses get jobs. Meanwhile, her Let Girls Learn initiative raised billions of dollars to help girls around the world gain access to schools, along with the empowerment that can come with an education. These were certainly great achievements, but there's an achievement that, for Michelle, is greater still. Despite the countless demands of holding public office, she and her husband were able to raise two amazing daughters.